unassigned and unattached. We were trained as specialists in bridge building, mine laying and picking up, and demolitions.
What's your date of birth?
June 29, 1924.
Oh, pretty soon.
Yeah, I'll be 81 shortly.
Wow. What was your highest rank when you left the service?
I left the service, I was a private. Well, I made the corporal technician, or T5, because I was what they call a tool room keeper in A Company.
Were you drafted or did you enlist?
I'm not sure. I volunteered.
There must be a story then.
I volunteered for induction to go with a buddy of mine who had been drafted. So we both went at the same time, and I volunteered then to go in the Army Air Corps. He made the Army Air Corps with one eye, and I became a combat engineer because that's the way the Army does things. And he ended up in Boston, up in the sail lofts down at the harbor, with a bunch of women repacking parachutes. And I was over getting shot at.
Wow, so I guess I'd call that enlisting. Do you remember the date?
March 16th, 1943.
Where were you living at the time?
84 North School Street in Manchester, Connecticut.
Why did you pick the branch of the service that you did? Just because your friend was going?
I really didn't pick it. I tried for Army Air Corps, yeah, but that was when it was the old Army Air Corps. It wasn't the Air Corps today. And they just told me I was a combat engineer. That's it.
Had you had any engineering background or experience?
No. I had been in the Connecticut State Guard when I was in high school, and I had learned how to do the manual of arms and marching drills and all those good things. And so when I went to Devon's, they took us out in the parking lot, and the staff sergeant, who was the cadre, said, "Southergill, you don't need this. You know how to do it. Go down to supply." So that's when I went down to the supply room and became the tool room keeper. And the first promotion list that came out, I was a PFC. And the second one, I was a Tech 5.
Wow, you jumped up quickly.
Yeah, I did. And I was a Tech 5 until, well, actually, we were in the woods in Champenois when I got broke. I actually got broke in Normandy. I told off a lieutenant, and he didn't like it, so they took away my stripes.
Wow.
They assigned a young fellow to take my place who knew nothing about tools. Now, we have a little wooden box in the tool room chest. Contains 6 non-electric blasting caps, and they're copper. And of course, with time, they turn a little green. Well, he was gung-ho to get those tools all in shape, and he pulled out this little box, and he finds this little copper tube all green, takes some steel wool to try and clean it up, and it blew up right in his hand. He didn't get too hurt. He had to pull some copper out of his face, but his eyes weren't affected, or his hand wasn't affected. But
He was lucky.
he was lucky. Yeah.
Do you recall your first days in the service?
You mean?
Right after you enlisted in Manchester.
They put us on a train at the depot in Manchester and chugged us up to Fort Devens, Massachusetts. We got off the train, and they had us march over to a billet. They assigned us beds, and then they called us out to go get our equipment, uniforms and stuff, and they gave us whatever they thought we needed. And then they took us in and started shooting us with things in the arm from both sides. And I don't know why the Army always does that. They give you your shots in your arm at night, and the next morning you can't. Now, if they give them to you during the day when you're active, you could work it through. But they, in their astute intelligence, don't do that.
Wow. How long did you stay at Fort Devens for basic training?
We were in the Repel Depot area for 3 days. They lined us up outside, and it's every third man, one step forward, right face, march into the trucks. We went up the road 2 miles and told us to get out. We activated the 150th Combat Engineer Battalion right there in Devens.
After only being there for 3 days?
Yeah. They had brought in a cadre of experienced non-coms and officers, and they started to teach us how to become engineers. People say basic training, and we didn't go through what they call boot camp because we were with the same people we lived with, and they taught us how to march. They took us out and taught us how to build bridges and infantry tactics, bayonet use and foxhole, all that stuff. And we spent 6 months in Devens. So we got on a train and went down to the Monongahela National Forest in West Virginia on maneuvers. And we trained there and they worked there for about 2 months. Until it got October and got cold. And they brought us out of the mountain back to Elkins, West Virginia. And we had some pyramidal tents there that we lived in. And then they took us to Fort Dix, New Jersey, and again put us in pyramidal tents. I think part of my story is that Dumais and Hinault and I, being headquarters squad of the 3rd Platoon, had a tent with all my tools. And the three of us, being kind of energetic and willing to look around, ended up getting some extension cords, and out of that one 40-watt bulb, we ended up with 3 60 watts, one over each of our beds. And they had given us a stove that some general had designed. It looked like an inverted ice cream cone with a door in its side, and I defy anybody to build a fire in it. So we went out and we looked around and we found by accident some grates from an old cook stove and some bricks. And we brought it back and we jacked up that thing and put the grates under it and the bricks under it, took a coffee can and made a vent out of it, so we could control the amount of air going into the fire. We get that little sucker red hot. And we were laying in our tents, in our skivvies, and the other guys that have to stay fully dressed because they can't get that sucker to heat up. And the guards used to come into our tent at night and get warm, and then they go out and do the rest of their route. And then we went from Dix up to Kilmer, which is in New Jersey. And that was the first time we were eating in modern mess halls with plates and trays. We've been using mess kits most of the time. And we got up there and we found out that we could get some passes into New York City. Well, before the passes came, I didn't feel well. So I went down to the medics and took the thermometer and shook it to about 102. Gave it back to the medic, and they sent me to the hospital. They have good medicine over there. Mostly, I think it's 100 proof. And good-looking nurses. So we had a great time. And then we got word that they were letting passes. Everybody got well. I mean,
miraculous recovery.
we emptied the hospital out. And I had to contact Lucy, my wife, and my girlfriend then. They lived in South Windsor, and asked her if she could come to New York where we could meet and have some fun together. Well, she asked her mother, and her mother immediately said no. But her sister-in-law said, look, I'll go with her. So Ann and Lucy met me in New York City. They had a hotel room, and I forget what hotel, but I knew what it was then. And we went out and had a great time. Went to dinner and to a show or something, and then I got on a bus and I went back to camp. Somebody threw up on my leg. But I got back and found out that nobody wanted passes. I could get another one. So I grabbed a pass, changed uniform, showered and shaved. Couldn't find any clothes because all my shirts with chevrons and my, ODs with chevrons were gone. There was a non-coms club on the base. Anybody who could fit into any of my clothes that had chevrons on them, they all went to the non-coms club. Anyway, I got back enough to get back out of there, and I went back to New York, went up to the hotel room. I was walking down the aisle to their room when they came out of their room. If I had been 2 minutes later, I'd have missed them. So we had another day of fun and games together, and then I went back to Kilmer, and they went back to South Windsor, and from Kilmer they took us down and threw us on the Queen Mary. And we were the Army runs things that the first on is the last off. And so we were going on first, so we became the permanent KPs to 15,000 men, which they fed twice a day. And we headed for Europe.
Did you know where you were going when you left America?
The Atlantic coast usually means Europe. Yeah, we had a pretty good idea.
Do you remember any of your instructors back in your training? Either in Fort Devens or New Jersey or Virginia?
Sergeant Anderson was our platoon sergeant. Corporal Bernstein was our assistant supply sergeant. Our supply sergeant was Sergeant Pryor. Now, all these guys been in the service for a while. They were regular Army stuff. But that's about the only ones we came in contact with. There was other people. Captain McCann was our CO, and he stayed right with us.
Is the captain the only one that stayed with you?
Yeah.
The others stayed back in
Yep.
in the other camps?
Sergeant Anderson got court-martialed. He came up from out west, and they couldn't buy ammunition, and he could steal some .22 ammunition off the firing range, which he did, and he mailed it home to his brother and his sons, and somebody picked it up, and they court-martialed him very lightly and sent him over to the 204th Engineers. But it was a sergeant, not a staff sergeant then.
Wow.
Corporal Bernstein, I tell about him there when we were on the rifle range, and he couldn't hit anything. So Sergeant Hepler and I laid down on opposite sides of him, and when the flag came up, we put one in the bullseye. So the guy couldn't understand how come there's two bullseyes and one missing the target entirely. But we got him qualified. He got to be an expert rifleman.
Wow. All right, so how long did it take you on the Queen Mary to get across the Atlantic?
About 5 days. We ended up in the harbor over there in Glasgow. I think the book is straight. It's got it as a fifth of something or other. Anyway, that's where we ended up, and we were the Having been the first troops aboard, we were the last troops to go off. So at one point we became the entire ship's complement, the MPs, the cooks, everything. And we were very unhappy because we could see the British seamen selling some of our meat over the side to bumboats. So we broke into the refrigerators, and we got steak, and we got eggs, and we got milk, and we had a feast. And the captain of the ship called up our captain and said, "Captain, your men are revolting." And the captain said, "They wouldn't do that." That was it. And then they put us on a lighter and took us into the city, put us on a train, took us down to Swindon. Yeah, Swindon. They offloaded us there in the middle of the night, of course. We always move in the middle of the night. So we're walking, a whole battalion is walking down the paved streets, and we hear this clomp, 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 clomp. All we can hear from us is a swish, swish, swish of the boots going by. And around the corner comes a squad of British soldiers with their hobnail boots, making more noise than a herd of cattle. And we got into Swindon, and we got put in a billet that was made for the British girls. So the beds were not 6 feet long. And some of the guys had a little problem getting their feet in and out of the bed. And then we went to work. Now in England in January, it doesn't get daylight until 9 o'clock in the morning.
And so this was January of 44?
We were on the Queen on New Year's Eve. Not the Queen you know. This was where they were. You had to get out of bed to change your mind because you were 5 high. And we'd get up. They couldn't see who was out there, so 3 or 4 guys would go out there in the dark and say, "Here, here, here, here." So the sergeant said, "Everybody, all present accounted for." He didn't know who was out there, and he didn't care. And then we go have breakfast, and we get to work. We'd arrive at an airport to put down some of that airport runway in the dark, and we'd be out working already when the British would arrive at 9 o'clock. And at 10 o'clock they had to have their tea. We were working like crazy out there building this airport. And they informed us that there was a war on. And I got in trouble there too. That's part of my book.
What did you do there, Norm?
I told off a lieutenant from the other company.
Another American company or the British?
American. I was a tool room keeper, and I would send out my tools to be used, and they would be coming back all mud and stuff. So I scrounged around and found a barrel, and I filled it with water and got some long-handled brushes. And when the guys came in, each guy took the brushes and cleaned off their shovel and handed it to me, and it was very efficient, very easy for me. Well, I had just emptied that barrel and got fresh water in it when somebody came in and says, "Hey, Southergill, the guys from B Company are over there washing off their boots in your water." Darker than hell, so I proceeded out there, and I saw sergeant chevrons on a guy. I started giving him all kinds of hell about washing his dirty boots in my water that I had to scrounge around and get. And he said, "Talk to the lieutenant." So I took one step back, threw him a salute, made an about face, and left.
Wow. And you let him wash his boots. And how long were you there building the airport in Swindon?
Well, we spent 6 months in England. We built the airports, and we did other work. We trained on the British equivalent to our pontoon bridges. we learned how to build a British Bailey bridge, so-called, which is the metal erector set that we built basically all across Europe.
Where did you go from after your 6 months in England?
Right to France. We ended it on the 5th of July. We landed on Normandy.
July 5th, 1944?
Yep. They had roughly a 10-mile bridgehead or area that they controlled, and we were sent out to keep the main supply routes open by patching holes in the road and taking any water that came off bleeding it away from them, and just maintaining the highways, keeping them open. And then, I forget the dates now, but St. Lo was a point that was holding us up, and Caen was holding up the British. The Germans had kind of stalled us right there. And when they had succeeded in getting past St. Lo, we went with them with a bulldozer in front of us clearing the road so we could take our vehicles, and we joined Patton's Third Army right there. We were with the...
At St. Lo?
Yeah.
That's when you joined. And how long were you with the Third Army?
To May 7th.
Did you stay with them for the rest of the time?
May 7th, 1945, yep.
Did you ever see Patton?
Yes. There's a picture of him somewhere around here with on our bridge across the Rhine, where he is urinating in their lifeblood. One of the guys snapped it, and everybody got copies. I don't know, there's one around there someplace.
Wow. What was your specific duties in this whole time? Were you always the tool keeper? So wherever you go, whatever job you did, you were in charge of giving out the tools and getting them back?
After we got involved in Normandy and I told off Lieutenant McGlinchey, I was just a private on the line.
Oh, so
And
your duties changed.
my job was just whatever they needed done. I was a laborer. I would pick up this or pick up that or do this or do that, whatever they told me to do.
Where did you go from St. Lo?
We headed down to Brittany, went down to Aranches, on through, how do they say that now? We called it Orleans, but I was watching Joan of Arc, and they called it Orleando, Orleans, Orleans, which is the French pronunciation of Orleans. We have American bastardization of Orleans.
And what did you do in all those towns?
Whatever was required, we built bridges. We took bridges down. We took up mines from the roads and the fields, and laid mines in roads, in the roads and the fields, depending on which whether we were going forward or going backwards. Ferried troops across rivers, basically building bridges. I believe that one of the generals reported that in the 12th Corps, we built more than a mile of Bailey bridges and more than a mile of the floating treadway bridges on our way across Europe.
Wow. Do you have any memorable experiences from going through those towns?
Well, we behaved ourselves pretty well as long as we were in France. We come into the Champagne Valley, and they had us in charge of guard duty on the 20th Corps. And Henault could speak French quite fluently, and he had a Jeep, and he met some French people, and they told him that the Germans had a cache up in a cave, and he went up there and he got his Jeep loaded as high as he could with bottles of champagne, and brought it back to us where we were, and we all had champagne coming out our ears. One group, I think 3 men, were sent across the little brook that they'd put a plank across to get across it. And once they got across, they pulled the plank behind them so that nobody could check up on the guard over there. I vividly recall Hinault pouring champagne into Renault's mouth as he's laying down on the tool chest. We didn't do much guard duty that night, but they never knew that. Once we got into Germany, somebody in headquarters had hooked up with a German generator, big one, and they'd converted it to AC. And we'd go into a town, and they would cut the wires on both ends of the town, hook the generator up to the electrical wires, and electrify the town. Well, we had some 60-watt bulbs that we could use, but their bulbs didn't last long because they're on direct current. We were on alternating current, and their radios were only to last a very short time, and they'd pop on us. And we did that quite a bit. Another town we went into, we have to realize that this is an old country, agricultural country, and they would build a fortified city or town, probably 5 or 6 families, and the exterior walls, made out of stone, had no windows, and only an opening for water to go out when they're washing their hands and stuff like that. And they'd have their house here, and a door would lead into the barn, and the next wall would be solid, and that was the next house, kitchen, and there do the same thing. And that night they closed the gates and put locks in them, and we were all locked in this little city. This was to keep the bandits away. This was back pre-World War I even, but that's how it was built. And they used to go out in the morning. They had a pump system set up where the rainwater would collect underneath the manure from the animals, and they would pump it out into a tank and take an oxen, because the horses were all been confiscated, and they'd go out into the field. They'd open a pitcock in the back, and the oxen would just walk into it. You're putting, well, urine basically on the field to give them nitrogen, and that was. And then when they got through with that, they'd come back with the so-called honey wagon and pick up the manure and take that out and spread that too. We were warned, don't eat any root crops in Europe, or in England for that matter, because they all use human waste fertilizer. They had nothing else.
All right, once you crossed into Germany, which towns did you go through?
We passed around Nuremberg, but I'm not sure what parts of Germany we were in half the time, because we didn't stay long.
You didn't?
We'd pull into a town and spend the night. The thing that makes me sad now is the fact that we'd pull into an area and take over a house, and they'd have armoires and beautiful beds and stuff. We just throw out the windows. We needed room to sleep, and nobody was going to sleep in a feather bed, and the other guys on the floor. So it was equal opportunity. Everything went out the window, and then we had our blanket rolls out on the floor.
I recall, wasn't one of your stories about a house that you guys stayed in, and there was a bed, and there were 3 of you? Where was that?
That was in Germany. up on the second floor. It wasn't a, no, wait a minute, it was 2 stories. We were coming up from Sargent Mines when to push back the Belle of the Bulge, and we stopped in a little Luxembourg home, friends of ours, and the lady showed us a whole squad of men, a dozen men, up to this beautiful bedroom, and here was a beautiful bed. And the sergeant said, "That's mine." We said, "No, no. Share one, share them all. Nobody's going to get it. All sleep on the floor." We just lined around that bed and all slept on the floor. There was no favoritism. Just because you got a stripe on your arm don't mean nothing to us. You sleep with us. And then in Germany again, we were up on the second floor of an outside banister, and James Fail and Billy, I'm not sure what his last name was, and me and I had agreed to share our blankets. So we made out a sleeping area for 3 people, knowing that one of us was bound to be on guard, or 1 or 2 of us might be on guard, so the other guy would have all the blankets or whatever, or when we came off guard we could just lay down. And Billy, he was younger than, he was a replacement, would lay across the bed, fully dressed, and fall dead asleep. I mean, dead asleep. And you couldn't move him. So, tough love, and to teach him a lesson, 4 of us picked him up, took him out on the landing, outside the door, which is outside the house.
He never woke up?
Not for until he got cold. And he came in and he was madder than a wet hen. And he blamed us for doing something to him. And we says, "You told us you were going to the latrine." He never could shake us. So we had done that. We took him to the latrine, that was all. So that was another bed story.
Wow. So what was the rest of your trek through Germany like?
Well, build a bridge here and ferry troops there and take a bridge down here, and then we got to the Rhine, and General Patton, of course, had an ongoing battle with Montgomery as to who was going to cross the Rhine first, and Patton wanted a bridge put in Toots Sweet, so we did. We put in a 1,000 and something feet floating treadway bridge at Oppenheim on the Rhine, and it was a complete surprise to the Germans. Once we got that bridge in, Patton's tanks went 5 miles without firing a shot. A complete surprise. They had no idea we were going to do that. So we ended up building 3 bridges right there. The first 2 were used. The third one never did get used, because at that time we got everything you needed to cross, and never mind. While we were there, we were billeted in a wine merchant's home. And I went down with the owner, with my M1, to see what was good wine. So he would take a rubber hose and a couple of glasses, and he would siphon out. Mix good. No, okay. Next barrel. Before we got through, we were buddies. And then I discovered that there was a whole bunch of boxes full of wine. I mean, in bottles. So we, a whole bunch of us, carried this stuff up to the street. And the 4th Armored was going down the road to go across our bridge. And we handed them bottles to the chaplain, to anybody, the drivers, anybody sitting in there, threw them up into the tanks. And years later, I was at the BFW and I was telling that story. And one of the guys says, "I got one of those bottles."
No kidding.
Yeah, he's now dead, but his cousin is a good friend of mine. But And then I met another man on a golf course and told him that story, and he had gotten a bottle.
Wow.
And he ended up a brigadier general in the Rhode Island National Guard.
Did you see combat?
Well, that depends on what combat is. We were basically not assaulted by infantry. We were usually assaulted by heavy weapons, mortars, 88s, tanks, things of that nature. I actually fired 8 rounds out of my M1.
When and where?
We were sent to put a infantry support bridge across a little canal. Just 2 planks laying across the canal. And we started working and somebody started shooting at us.
Was this Germany or France?
Things got blurred, I'm not positive with it. Anyway, we lined up on the canal bank. We emptied one clip in general direction of what was down there and went back to work, finished the job.
No more shooting.
And the infantry went by then, and we said, if you find anybody, you'll know we killed them down there. It's all right. We never learned out whether we killed anybody or hurt anybody or just scared them off or what we did. But anyway, we got the bridge built, and that was it.
So that was the only time that you had to fire?
Yeah. The only time I had a chance to fire. And of course, the ferrying of troops across the Arkansas River was a major campaign for us. We lost a lot of men there.
How many casualties were there in your unit?
It's in there someplace.
Okay.
125 killed, I think, something like that.
We can look that up later.
Yeah.
What were most of your casualties from?
Artillery.
With all your bridge building, were some of your casualties from drowning?
Only in the States.
Oh, really?
Yeah, we lost.
How did that happen?
We lost 3 men up in up in New Hampshire.
This was during training?
Yeah. No, it's lights on, yeah.
Now, you said you had some experiences building bridges across, what river was that? Arso? Which river in Germany were you trying to build bridges across?
Oh, we built bridges across the Moselle, and a number of other.
You had an experience where you were where you got stranded in the middle of one of those rivers into cribbing and the boat went downstream. Can you tell me about that experience?
That was in Luxembourg, and I'm not sure whereabouts in Luxembourg it was, but we were assigned to rebuild this bridge that had been destroyed completely, except for a pier out in the middle of the river. So we wanted to use that pier, but it wasn't high enough for what we wanted, so we had to build a crib. You understand crib?
No, not
Logs on top of another,
almost like scaffolding kind of thing?
Well, not like that. You take 2 logs, put them here, and put 2 logs on top of them, 2 logs on top of them, and build it up so you got the right height you want. And in order to do that, this was territory we already owned, so we weren't worried about it. We had to group on the other side of the river, and we got a rope to them, and they had the winch on the front of their truck, and we had a winch on the front of our truck, and we made a dolly. It hung off a rope on pulleys, and we could load the logs on that, and then run it out to the middle and unload the logs, and then bring it back and get some more. And we were doing that, and I was assigned to go out with the dolly with some logs on it. And they did ask us to take a rope and put it over the line, and each guy hang onto an end in case something should happen. Well, it happened. And it happened because the guys on the other side were watching a German girl. And the guys on our side, the winch got kinked somehow or other, so it wouldn't let go anymore. And the truck over there kept pulling, and pretty soon something had to give. Well, I was halfway between the crib and the shore when it gave. And it bounced up in the air, and it bounced back down to the water, and it bounced up again, and about then the other guy bailed off, and wintertime, we're wearing Mackinaws or the cottage belt over, so it was like wearing a life jacket, and he goes bobbing down the river, and they got a boat down there just in case that happened, and I grabbed a hold of the steel wire, it was still up there, and I hand out to the, and dropped off on the crib. And the guy, whoever it was, I'm not sure, I say it was Dinsky or Rowland, but they deny it. Anyway, we had 3 men down there with an assault boat in case this happened. And they saw him fall in, they jumped in the assault boat and started paddling, but they didn't push it off into deep water. They just stand there making water move. So the other guy with his cottage belt on his Mackinaw, it's like a big life jacket, come over and he fell into the boat and says, "Help me! I can't swim." They got a big laugh out of that one.
Self-rescue.
And they said to me, "Come on back." Well, by that time I had dropped off the steel and it was up there about 6 feet over my head. I said, "I can't get up. You got to come get me." So I sat down on the logs and waited until they rebuilt the raft, and they came and got me.
Wow. Were you awarded any medals or citations? I know you were. You want to tell me what they were?
Well, actually, most of the medals that we received were issued to the battalion. I mean, the campaign stars that we have, the 5 campaign stars were to the battalion, but each man got it. The only thing other than that we got was the Good Conduct Medal, which we deserved, and the American Defense Medal. And in my case, I got the Purple Heart. That was an individual award.
How did you get the Purple Heart?
When we were on the Oursau River, under the guns of the Siegfried Line, they assigned our squad, to put in what they call an infantry support bridge. Well, the first thing to do was to take an assault boat across this raging river, and behind us drag a light line so we could get a steel cable to follow us and find a place to lock it on the other side, which happened to be the trunk of the roots of a tree. And then you put snaps on it and tighten it up, and it's going to stay there. And all we do on this, we don't have any rifles. All I got is my sheath knife. And you can hear the Germans talking in the pillbox right side of us. So we got that done, and then we went back across the river, and we could then start to put this bridge together. So the problem was the bridge wasn't designed for that Rough River. And now when you build that, it's just a pontoon with a runway on it and a rail with a rope going through it, and that floats. And the men have a chance to grab the rail, the rope, and run across the river. And that is held in place by a rope going up to this rod, and they have a hook that fits over this steel. Well, with the speed of that river, that hook would just go, and we'd end up with the raft still tied to us, but floating down the river. I don't know how long we worked on that, trying to get something across. And then the Germans dropped a mortar in. Luckily for them, not for me, it hit that steel cable and cut it. And when it came whipping back, it caught me across both knees, which didn't break any blood, but it sure did a job on my knees. And I was on light duty for must have been a week after that. But before I could get back to the medics, they assigned us to ferry troops across on barges, on boats. So I worked on that. Then I got scared and went down in my hole. And when I came out of them, my boys had already gone back. I joined another group to come over, and I worked with them. Then I finally went back, and they had secured the other side anyway by then. I went back to the dock, and he checked me out. He put me on ace bandages on both knees. He said, "You're on light duty for about a week."
Well, so what happened where you went back in your foxhole?
I was scared.
This was at that same river where you were trying to get that thing, and it was after you got hit?
This was after I got hit, hurt across my knees. Was when I was taking a boat down, and we missed the embarkation point. And I went in the water to hold the boat so they could load it, and they did, and then they took it away from me. And I went up through the cemetery, through a barrage.
All by yourself?
All by myself. Down into the basement of a place, and as far back as I could go. It stayed right there, scared that I couldn't move. And then a squad of infantry came in. They were going over to take back some prisoners, and they gave me some blankets. I was soaking wet, of course. They gave me some blankets and some rations, and I fell asleep. And meantime, the guys I was with had gone back under the cover of darkness. A new group had come in.
What did they think happened to you? Didn't they wonder why you weren't there?
Missing in action. 24 hours. They had put that out. Southergill missing in action for 20. Then missing in action, period. Because we were having men drown, boats go down the river in rough water, and some came back. You thought they were dead, and they came back because they had gone down river a mile and got out and come back up slowly through whatever they were going through. Yeah, I was missing in action for a while, and that's when I met the Lord. No one didn't know it. That was, you read that part too, no doubt, in the book.
I did, but do you want to tell me that story on tape?
We took the boat down to the river, and we were upstream of the embarkation point, but we couldn't see it. We put the boat in the water. The engineers held the bow. I held the stern. I was in the water holding the stern against the shore. The infantry got in the boat. By the time they got the infantry in, the weight of the boat just took it away from my hands, and away they went, and I was stuck there. Well, I was going to go back to the cellar where the rest of our guys were, and I headed up the hill, which happened to be through a cemetery. And about that time, the Germans decided they were going to throw a barrage of everything you could think of. They had 50 cals and rockets, screaming Mimis and 88s, and I was going up this hill, crawling through the mud, and trying to get up and run, and fall down because it was dark and running. I finally got up to the top and I found a cellar that I went into. Now, while I was coming up that hill, I saw a shadowy figure between the Germans and me. I never got hurt. I could hear the impact of bullets into the ground around me, but I didn't get touched. And I got into the cellar and I stayed there. Scared. Oh boy, was I scared. And then I wanted to get back and join the unit after the infantry had gone through and left me some rations and some blankets, and I got warm, and I'd go to the door. This was daylight now. I'd go to the door and I could just about see where the other guys were. Just as I was ready to run, they dropped in an 88 and back in my hole. So I didn't get back to them until mid-afternoon, and I finally joined them.
Wow, and that's when you got to see the doctor about your knees?
That's when I got back to the base, yeah. And
did you have any lasting damage from that cable hitting your knees?
I have since had a knee replacement, and the other knee is hurting too, so that may be next knee replacement. We'll see. Right now at 81, you question whether you want to do it or not.
Now, Norm, I'm going to ask you some questions about daily life and living conditions.
Mm-hmm.
How did you stay in touch with your family while you were in the service? You had a girlfriend at this time? Lucy was back home?
Yep. You wrote letters. You could do, what did they call it? V-mail, which means you'd write your letter, they would take a photograph of it and reduce it. In fact, they might take a photograph of 100 letters and reduce it down to one package. When it got to the States, they'd enlarge it again, and then they'd deliver it to your recipient. Then you wrote those letters, or you wrote regular letters, and they would take, depending, a week, 10 days, or if the ship got through. In fact, one of my letters came back to me all burnt. There'd been a fire on one of the ships that they was taking it back to the States with. But that's how we corresponded. We had no communications, no radio, no telephones.
Did you write many letters?
Oh yeah, many as we could when you were not working.
What was the food like?
We were basically on B rations.
B?
B, C. B ration is basically a K ration, but it was, the Army classified it as a B ration. You get your K rations, and you get a D ration, which is a candy bar, a very high potent candy bar. And our cooks were good. If they got some good food in, they would make us. One thing they got was powdered eggs. And they learned quick that if they made powdered eggs, the guys would throw it in the garbage. Rather go hungry and eat it. So they would take and make custard. And the guys would eat it. So we had those, had bread, meat. One instance, we were coming back from a mission, and we came by this farm, and there was a bunch of turkeys and geese and chickens out in the barnyard. We stopped the truck, the whole squad throwing helmets, anything you could do to grab and knock down chickens and turkeys, geese. We got back to the area we were staying in, and we gave all the stuff to the cooks, except for one turkey.
What happened to him?
We had run into a German freight train that was full of butter, big boxes of German butter. We'd grabbed one of those boxes, gave a couple to the cooks too. But we found a 5-gallon pail. We built a fire. We put the butter in the pail until it melted and got boiling. And then we'd dissect our turkey and we'd pre-cook in boiling butter. Then we'd take it out and we'd put it in wax paper if we could find some or something to keep it, and we'd put it in a barracks bag. And then we'd eat whatever we wanted to that night. And these just required reheating. That's all. They were basically cooked. And then I'd go on the ration detail, and I'd talk to the quartermaster people down there, and I'd probably end up with a jar of jam and a loaf of bread or two. We never went hungry because some of us were very good at
Very resourceful.
resourceful, yes. Yeah.
Now, if you were hopping from town to town, most of the time it sounds like, did your cooks go along with your unit and actually set up cooking kitchens while you're en route and then just shut them down and march on and set up again?
They had a couple of trucks equipped with the ranges, and they'd bring them to us because basically they had to supply 3 platoons. First, second, and third platoon at an A company would be one cook, one kitchen, and then each of the other companies had their own. But they would set up and cook, or if they couldn't set up, they would bring it out in big metal containers, and like soup would come out in big containers that they would service. We eat out of mess kits, and they have some bread.
So most of your meals in the field was through a chow line.
Oh, definitely.
You didn't have any real mess halls to speak of,
No,
where you actually went in and sat down?
Never had any. Yes, we did. Devons, we had them. We had them in Devons, and we had them in Camp Kilmer. That was the only 2 mess halls we ever got into.
Wow.
Oh, we had one in England too. Just for, I think it was 1, maybe 2 meals. We went through this mess hall, and at the end of the line, there was an officer and a 5-gallon bucket with a screen on the top. And the sign was up, take all you want, but eat all you take. And they wanted nothing in that bucket except stuff that you just couldn't eat, like bones and fat and gristle. That you could put in, but nothing else. And you learned real quick to take what you could eat and eat what you took. And the guy at the end said, "This has come 3,000 miles in a boat. All this food had to come from the United States via merchant ship, and they were being sunk like you wouldn't believe." In fact, we almost lost that war because of that. The U-boats were so proficient in shooting our ships down, and we couldn't build them fast enough. But we finally got some anti-submarine warfare things working, and then we could get some supplies. Did you know that they sunk a passenger ship in the British Channel during D-Day?
No.
850 men died.
Civilians?
No, soldiers. They were on this transport being brought across, and before they could get into the small boats, a German sub got that ship and sunk it with all the men on board.
Did you have enough supplies and other resources that you need? Were there shortages of anything?
No, we were. Another story. We had a warrant officer who was our S4 officer. He was a warrant. And back in those days, a warrant, well, even today, a warrant officer is neither a a fish or a fowl. They don't know what to do with them because they're not enlisted men and they're not officers. They're warrant officers, and this goes back to the Civil War when they had the warrants. They were mostly supplied. And we were in England. No, first off, we were in Devon's, and he would take me and the truck driver, and we'd go into town. He'd get a pint and bring it back past the MPs, and we'd go into the quartermaster, and he met some of his old buddies because he was a regular Army guy. And what do you got for me? Well, what do you need? Well, we need something. We got some Class X uniforms, suntans. Now, Class X means it's got a bullet hole, it's been patched, not too obscene. So we'd fill the truck with Class X uniforms, take them back to supply and break them up by sizes. Let the guys come in and take 2 apiece. Well, that meant they could save their suntans, which they had two uniforms in the suntans. They could save them for...
Now, what's a suntan?
That's this kind of stuff, Chino.
Oh.
They could save those for drills and inspections, and they could wear the other stuff on pass or to the PX or something else, and then they'd send it out to be washed. So our guys had all kinds of uniform because he was that good a supply sergeant or officer. And in England, when D-Day broke, everything was... He went down to our quartermaster corps and he says, "We've just been transferred to the Armored Engineers. What can you do for me?" Well, we got armor jackets, and we got some bib overalls that you can get maybe 2 to a squad. We can't give you all of them. Okay, we'll take them. So we ended up with field jackets on, that were like a blouse, nice field jacket. Next day he went down to a different quartermaster post. He says, "We just been transferred to the Air Corps Engineers. 2 pair of parachute boots per man." That's all they had. So we had parachute boots, no leggings anymore, because you could blouse your pants into a parachute boot, and tanker jackets. And when we got into France, we'd be either driving along or marching along, and the guy would say, "What the hell are you? Are you Air Force? Or are you tank?" But we were well supplied. And then in Luxembourg, I don't know where they came from or how we got them. Wintertime, well below zero, snow all over the place, and they came up with some shoe packs. That's the rubber bottoms and the waterproof tops, came up almost to your knee, and heavy socks that would fit in there, and a piece of felt was on the bottom to step on. And they said, "Look, whenever you're with artificial heat, take off the boots and take out those felts. Otherwise, you're going to be walking on ice." So we did. But we were comfortable. We had, and then they also gave us a pair of gloves. They had this one you could get your finger inside, like a pyramid. It was a mitten, rather. But you could get this finger out to reach into the trigger. So you had a trigger finger there. This one was just a regular glove. And they used to come up and they would strap here and strap there. So you could keep cold out, snow out. I guess I don't know where they came from. But all of a sudden we had these things. There is a story around that one of our men, his father was a big wig in Bean. And they wrote a letter, and the kid said, "Dad, we need some fall weather gear for cold weather." And that he had enough whack with them to ship us whatever we needed for a whole battalion.
Wow.
And we're the only ones that got them from LL Bean.
That was a good connection.
Yeah.
Did you feel pressure or stress? Well, we know you did. How did you guys handle the pressure and stress of battle? Or being shot at while you were working on your bridges?
We joked. We worked hard. And we were too busy working to think about what was happening around us. And one thing that would be said occasionally was, "What the hell, do you want to live forever?" You know, Chevalier, macho type of thing, but that was what we were.
Was there anything that you did special for good luck?
Well, Lucy had given me, or my mother had given me a cigarette case, metal cigarette case, so I could have cigarettes and I think a $20 bill in my pocket and Lucy's picture. And I carried that in my shirt pocket all the time I was available, so that was, yeah, that was part of it. Yeah.
You carried that throughout the war? You
Yep.
made that all the way through to the end with you?
Still got it upstairs.
Oh.
No cigarettes, no $20 bill, but
How did people entertain themselves? Did you ever get R&R or see any USO shows or anything like that?
we had a USO show in England. And what happened was that they had a place for USO show with a bunch of boards for seats and a stage. And we were sitting down there waiting for the show to start. And this guy came wandering down from the PX, got up on the stage, and he started telling jokes. Jokes that we understood. And we were laughing fit to kill. I mean, we were having a great time. And finally, the USO show arrived. And it was it was an English USO show. And they weren't that sharp. All I can remember is there was some girl out there with not a very good body singing, "Bring me back a banana, sailor boy." That was the only USO show we ever got to. We'd have the Red Cross come up with donuts, and they'd take our sugar and our flour and make donuts, and we'd have to be without sugar for 2 weeks. But that was something else. No, we didn't get back far enough to get. I think one squad was working on a bridge, and Bing Crosby came up in the Jeep. And they wouldn't let him cross the bridge until he sang. So they had a little, then they put the planks back in, let him cross the bridge.
Did you ever get any R&R?
No. Oh, wait a minute. Yes, I did too. But this was after the war was over.
Oh, the war was over and you were back home in the United States?
No, I was in Germany, and I got a 3-day pass to Paris.
So what did you do when you're 3 days in Paris?
Drank.
All 3 days?
Yep.
Do you remember anything you did there?
Remarkably, I was sober. I drank a 5-star cognac with beer chasers for 3 days, but we never missed a meal. And some of the things that happened, a guy came in, we were in this bar, and the prostitutes were coming in trying to talk us into going out with them, sitting on our laps and things like that. And we say, "Go find somebody else." And this guy came in and got drinking with us, and friendly. He was another GI. He says, "Hey, you want to go with me on my rounds?" I says, "What rounds?" Oh, he says, "I got a school of girls." He was stationed in Paris. So we went out and we'd stop in and He says, if you want one, it's free. But she'd pay him his money and give him a hug and a kiss, and he'd go on his way. And on one of my trips in there, I tell the story about crossing the Yaroslav River and the boat sinking. And Densky and Podvin and I were the engineer crew. And Densky and I were talking with the lieutenant in charge of the infantry, and Paul Podvin, who was an older man than we were, was on his hands and knees hollering, "Help, help, I can't swim." And we went over and we took him by the shoulder and says, "Paul, shut up and stand up."
It wasn't even over his head?
No, it was his hands and knees. Took him back, never saw him again until I went to Paris. I'm walking down the street in Paris, and here comes Paul, all slicked up in his crisp uniform. "How the hell did you get here?" He's working in the American Exchange in Paris, has a room in the hotel, the whole bit, and he left us at that, when he got scared, combat fatigue. Back he went. Of course, he used to be a professional waiter, and he could speak French quite well. But he was a fuddy-duddy. He talked about writing letters home. He wasn't married. He had a mother, that's all. And apparently she was very particular, because he would write a letter, longhand, let it sit a while, get out a dictionary and check for spelling, for sentence structure. He would write that letter 3 times before he was satisfied to make it in a letter to send to his mother.
Wow.
But he, like I say, he was a professional waiter before the war and could speak French quite fluently. Other than that, that's how he was.
Do you recall any particularly humorous or unusual events?
We thought it was quite humorous when we took Billy out and put him on.
Yes, everybody but Billy probably.
Yeah.
Can you remember any other pranks you played on each other?
I was coming back from somewhere, and 2 of our guys were practicing with their pistols that they'd found, captured some or other. And they were standing about 15, 20 feet apart, and they had a glass jar up on the brick. And they were... I took my trusty M1 and between them, I'm behind them, they don't know I'm there. And wham, the jar goes. I turned around and I was laughing, but they weren't. I scared the hell right out of them. They almost wanted to shoot me with their pistols.
Boy, Norm, you were quite the prankster.
Oh, I did a lot of things like that I shouldn't have done.
For the record, Norm does have photographs and his discharge papers, and also a book about his war experiences that'll be attached to this record. Norm, do you recall your last day in service? Well, actually, before that, the war ended while you were still in Germany. Where were you when you heard about the war ending?
We were in Czechoslovakia.
Do you remember exactly what you were doing and what your feelings were when you heard about the end of the war?
We were lined up in our trucks, ready to go to Prague, because we were the closest combat troops. And they were notified that the German SS were running down the civilians in Prague with their tanks. And they ordered us to go down and stop them.
So that's why you were in Czechoslovakia in the first place?
We were in Czechoslovakia looking for some diplomats. We never found them. Somebody else did. But we were in the trucks waiting to go, waiting for the orders to go, when the radio came in and said, "Hold your position. The war's over."
What was that like? Was everybody?
They were happy, very happy. Yeah, very happy, because we were in a nice little town. We had a good billet, because we took over what the SS Germans lived in. Very nice accommodations, really, and cooks had it set up in the street. They could cook. And, the only problem with that situation was that we could do nothing with the civilians. We were ordered to leave them alone. Don't do anything to harm them or to help them. Well, we did. We had some Germans that we put in prison for their own protection. So we set up machine guns back to back, one facing the prison to keep the Germans in, and one facing out to keep the Czechoslovakians out. And we had some gasoline, which we put into one of their vehicles, and the civilians took the mayor and tied his hands and put a rope around his neck and tied the rope to the bumper of the car, and they drove him out of town, where they hung him. He was a collaborator with the Germans, and we could do nothing to stop it. That was orders. Don't do nothing. And then we were supposed to leave on a Friday, and the Russians were supposed to come in on a Sunday. Should be a couple days of grace there. And we got word that there was a Russian column coming in. So somebody sent a tank destroyer down there, and we went down with our M1s, and the tank destroyer just pulled us right across the road, I mean blocking the whole road. And up, down here comes I don't know what you classify, horses and wagons and women and children and a World War I type tank. And the order was given to halt by the guys in the tanks. And the guy who was leading the first horse made a run around the horse. And the 50 cal man on that tank, with one slug, I don't know how he did it, fired one round, killed the horse and the man. I mean, you combat troops, you don't mess with these guys, because they don't worry about it too much. And the Russians stopped, turned around, and went back. I mean, they knew they were up against force right then. And of course, Pat would love to go right on to Moscow, but they stopped him.
And where did you go from there?
We went back to Regensburg, Germany, and occupied a artillery unit's billets. And they had an indoor horse rink. And somebody had gone out and taken back riding horses from the farmers who had grabbed them when they could to be horses, you know, to break them into the pulling plows and stuff. But they were contraband, so well, we had half a dozen or so beautiful riding horses. And we got some Austrian riding instructors, and they would teach us how to ride the horses, and we'd go round and round that thing. And another guy and I took a horse out, and we were going through the neighborhood, and we actually drove our horse, or rode our horse, through Messerschmitt factory that had been obliterated. And we brought it back and put it back. Then I got.
Did you already know how to ride horses from back in Connecticut, or was this your
I've been on horses sometimes, but I never did enjoy it. They're awful hard things. Then I got transferred, or on detached service, to a artillery unit that wanted a garage for their equipment, and they assigned us, Phil and I, to build it. So we found some steel out on the airport. We had to get the big trailer to drag that in a crane. We got that in, and we got things going. We got the walls up, and we were working with German prisoners. We had 10, 15 German prisoners and 3 guards to watch them because we were busy. We couldn't stand guard too. And they were working with us. They were working great. So we got the steel up on the roof, just, you know, angle steel. And the next thing you have to do is you have to drill holes through the steel in order to bolt wood so you can screw the roof onto the wood. And we got these big drills. And we had a young, rugged guy who one day he was working a pick. I says, "What's this stuff? What's that?" "Well, that's my SS tattoo." And I laughed. I said, "Hey, Superman." He came back the next day. He'd cut that out with a knife, which he was their hero. Oh, he could do things like that. The Germans looked up to him like, great. Oh, he was their boy. So, okay. I used to be a house painter before I went to service, and the heights don't bother me at all. So I grabbed a drill and gave him one. He says, "Let's go," and up and drill the hole. So I went up the ladder and got up on the steel, and I'm walking up the steel, and he comes up. He stands up, and he sits right down. He starts, and the guy's down below. The hero's gone. He's just one of the boys. We got the garage built. And we lived with the artillerymen then that ate at their mess hall, and they had an ice cream machine that they'd picked up someplace. And we loved to get ice cream because we'd never had any. And then they transferred us out because they made 150 into a high point. No, you probably understand the point system that they had in World War II.
No.
Okay. I'm not sure what it required, but you had to have something like 27 or 32 points to be able to go home. And I didn't have enough. I was lacking like 3. And most of the guys didn't have enough. If you were married, if you had Bronze Star or something, and the length of service, and all these things quanted into it. Anyway, they brought in all these guys from all over to fill up the complement and make it a viable shipment to ship it home. So they transferred me out to artillery unit, and we went back into Reims in France, and they transferred me out again to somebody else. And then I got transferred to a General Service Engineer Regiment, whose claim to fame was they had built a pipeline from Normandy to the Rhine. And, you know, psychologically, you're a combat soldier coming back into a non-combat unit. You're arrogant, you're whatever. And this one had a colonel bucking for a star. And his idea was that every day you were to pass in review. I was never a garrison soldier. So I used to go up the road to the combat engineer unit and play volleyball. And then they said, "Well, we're going to ship you to China. You got to have some calorie shots." I didn't want a calorie shot. So that day I went and played volleyball. And they finally caught up with me. And I had to go and get one shot. It was a series of 2 or 3. They got me with one shot, and then the war in the Pacific was over. Okay, no more shots. So That's another bad boy story. USO show. Betty Grable was coming. So I checked the daily report, who's on duty and what's going on. I'm clear. So I went back to I'm shaving it and all shined up to go see Betty Grable. Of course, I'd be there with 5,000 other troops. No way she's going to see me at all, but that's all right. I'm looking good. In came the first sergeant. He says, you're on guard duty. I said, I wasn't this morning. No. Of course, I'm a new kid on the block, too, you know. So-and-so was going to be, but he wanted to go see Betty Grable. And he says, never mind. You're on guard. Okay, Sarge. So I went back, got my fatigues on again, got my cartridge belt, went up to the command post, because we didn't have rifles in, they'd taken them all away from us. And we had 5 German prisoners working around the mess hall and cleaning up area. So I drew a rifle from their stack and put my hand out. He says, what do you want? I said, I want some ammunition. I'm guarding German prisoners. We ain't got any. I walked over to the rack and put the rifle back. I says, get yourself another boy. Hey, wait. He scrounged around. Between him and the other people in headquarters, they ended up with 5 rounds of M1 ammunition, which I hand-loaded because there wasn't a clip yet. I hand-loaded then. Okay, now I'm on guard. So out I went, picked up my 5 prisoners, and they had a special latrine for them over here. And I'd been watching them. One would go, no, they'd all go. They'd stand around, take their turns going in and out of the latrine. The guy says, go ahead. Alles? No, 9. You, go ahead. I patted my M1. I says, if I can't hit you from here, if you're trying to run, I deserve to follow you. So, go ahead. Well, probably the first time they'd been alone in a bathroom by themselves in months. They loved me. One coming, one going, but working like crazy. So it comes time for chow. Well, I wait till the troops have gone through, and then I present myself and my prisoners for chow. And the sergeant says, don't have any. I says, well, up come the captain, and he's a curtain climbing Mr. Casper Milquetoast type. And he's, what's the matter? I says, well, I haven't eaten, neither have my prisoners. He says, Sergeant, feed these people. I don't know what they ate, but they got something up to give us, and we took it outside. So we're leaning up against the mess hall. Me, 1, 2, 3, 4. My rifle's over here, out of the way, you know, and we're all eating away. Out come the captain. You can't sit there with the prisoners. I said, well, I'm all through anyway, and they grabbed my mess kit, they're going to clean it. So I went out in the middle of the place, and here is a group of water cans and gas cans. Well, I know the difference. I've been around this place. So I go, I'm sitting on the water in the cans with my M1, lit up a cigarette. Out come the captain. You can't smoke here, it's gasoline. I said, sir, these are water cans. Well, the colonel. Of course, I was saying to hell with him anyway, but okay. So I finished up my day that guard duty, and they never asked me again. And then I got then they took us right back to Regensburg. I could have thrown a stone from where I ended up to where I had left 2 months before. And they threw me out again, put me on the train, took me back to Marseille. And I ended up with a bunch of guys getting ready to go home, paratroopers and engineers and whatever. And they had a victory ship in the harbor, and they put us on the victory ship. And we started to sail away. Of course, we're 5 bunks high, and you can't breathe from the bodies. And they came around and said, "We need a storekeeper's assistant." I said, "You got your man right here." So I went up, met this young guy from Iowa who was the storekeeper. He said, "Your job is to take a group of men down to the forward hold and pick up the rations for the day, bring them back and give them to the cooks, then dismiss your detail." Fine. "Then we want you to go into the reefer and take out milk cartons, frozen solid, and you space them out so they have air to thaw. And then you got apples and oranges." Well, the milk came out, and here was 2 for Norm. The apples came out, and there's 2 for Norm. And the oranges came out, and there's 2 for Norm. How was the rest of the guys? I'm getting mine. And when it came time to eat, you go behind the counter where the cooks are. Piece of bread in your hand, they throw half a chicken on top of the bread, and that's your lunch.
So that paid to volunteer.
Oh! And then they were having an inspection. And the storekeeper says, "You don't understand inspection." I says, "No." Well, he says, "Go up to my quarters and have a nap." So I went up forward, up to his stateroom. He shared it with another sailor. Then laid in his bed and had a nap. Then he came and got me in time for supper. And I ate with the crew, roast Long Island duckling. I had a great time. We ended up in Newport News, Virginia. And they
Are
took,
you sure it was Newport News?
that's Newport Naval Base, but Newport News is a
Well, because in your book, or no, on your tape, you said then it wasn't that, it was Norfolk. Which was it?
okay, it could have been Norfolk, but I think in Norfolk you got Newport News. I'm not sure.
Oh, and it may be.
Yeah.
So that's where you actually landed?
Yeah, we landed there.
And were you discharged at that point?
No. We were taken to a camp and given this was right around Thanksgiving. We're getting close to Thanksgiving time. And given a first-class dinner prepared by German cooks. They had these 4-foot by 4-foot pans of mashed potatoes, and they had painted with herbs and spices beautiful pictures on that stuff. I mean, it was actually a shame to dig in with a spoon and break it up. We had turkey in the whole bit. And then in 2 days from that, they put us on a train and sent us to Devens.
And were you discharged from Devens?
We were, yeah.
Remember the last day in service?
Yeah. The last day in service, they asked you, "Do you have any complaints?" And I said, "Yeah, I lost partial hearing in my right ear." "How?" "Going through the transition course in Devens. I was right next to a bomb hole when they blew it up. And I've always had a little less hearing in that ear." Okay. So they had a plywood walkway going down both sides and the back. I'm standing at the back. "Can you hear me?" I said, "Yeah." "Well, good God, that plywood is echoing like crazy." And he said, "You're okay." That was my test. I was ready. I wanted to go home anyway. And we were going through, on the way coming from my own outfit, they were just issuing Eisenhower jackets. And I wanted an Ike jacket. I put my name in. Every place that I went, I put my name in for an Ike, just the wrong size, that's all. So I get into Devens, and we're going through, they're taking away our stuff, and the guy in front of me's got an Ike jacket, and he's asking for a blouse. He takes off the jacket, puts it on the counter, I pick it up and put it on. The supply man says, "You can't do that." I said, "The hell I can." It's upstairs. I'll show it to you.
And I'll get a picture of that.
Okay.
When you got out of the service, Norm, what did you do for a career?
I went back to Cheney Brothers, where I had been drafted from, and they gave me back a job wrapping silk again. But after having been outside for 2 years, I just couldn't take the confinement of being in a building working for 8 hours. It just wasn't me, that's all. So I had to quit. My brother-in-law, who was a farmer, offered me a job as his right-hand man. And I took that, and I worked on his potato and tobacco farm for a couple of years. And then I went to, well, I had been a house painter before I went into service. My brother was a painting contractor anyway, so I figured, hey, why not go to painting? So I signed up for the GI Bill to learn how to paint. Went into Hartford 1 day a week to a school where they taught us 20-year-old instructions that would do you no good whatsoever. Like, their idea of a first-class job was to take lead and turpentine, mix it up very thin, and paint whatever you're going to paint. Now, it would just show through it because it's just, then you sand it smooth, and you take the same paint and add a little oil, and you paint it again. You end up with 5 coats of lead and oil on. I mean, it's beautiful. The last coat you put in more oil, make it like enamel, and it is gorgeous. But who the hell is going to pay for that kind of work? This is just after the war's over. But they did teach us how to grain metal doors, or anything grained. We had equipment to grain. And then we waxed a wall and learned how to hang paper, which I was already a paper hanger, so I knew how to do it. So actually it was a waste of time, but the government insisted that you do it in order to get. And then I took a job with a house painter on the GI Bill. He was supposed to pay me so much, and the government paid me so much. And then the government cut back on my pay, and he's supposed to increase his, which he never did. And the government cut back on my pay, and he's supposed to increase me again, which he never did, so I quit. Went to work for my brother, and got journeyman skills, because I was a journeyman then. And we worked at that for 10 years.
And you went on to marry your girlfriend, Lucy?
Yes.
And had how many kids?
2.
Do you ever go to any reunions?
I've been to most of our reunions, except I missed that one. Except I didn't go this year, and I won't go next year. And my reason for not going is, well, you saw the A Company up on the wall, what was left of it then, and some of them have passed since. And I don't want to see them with aftermath of a stroke or a heart attack on oxygen, walkers, wheelchairs. No. I fought with these guys. My memory is...
No, I don't blame you. After the war, did you stay in touch with any friends that you had made during the war?
Just through the Union.
Did you join any veterans organizations after the war? I know you're in one.
That's a story, too. Before I went into the service, I joined the Connecticut State Guard. I mentioned that earlier. And there were 2 companies in the Manchester Armory, one sponsored by the American Legion and one sponsored by the Veterans of Foreign Wars. And so when they reactivated the Guard, I figured that I'd go up to the VFW and see if they were going to sponsor a company. I went up and I joined. Went to, I think, 2 meetings, and all they did was sit there and argue and fight over money and this and the other thing. I didn't need that. So I went down and I joined the Connecticut State Guard, and met the officers and so forth, and they made me a sergeant because I knew how to instruct men, and some of the men from the VFW did come down and become part of that. The guy who Lucy was going out with before she met me, or before I got involved with her, became my first sergeant. He was an ex-Marine, tech sergeant in the Marine Air Corps. And I had to caution him because he did not know how to handle men, unfortunately, but we managed. Like, he had the men lined up for roll call, and some had their hands in their pockets, you know. Like, they weren't called to attention anyway, they were just standing there. And he said, "I'll fill those pockets with sand and sew them shut." And they knew, and I knew, that there's nothing he could do like that. No way, no how. These are civilians. They aren't signed into U.S. Marines. So I had to tell them, look, if you don't ever tell them something that you're going to do unless you can do it. If you want to kick their ass, that's another thing. But don't tell them you can't. You won't do it because if you're going to. And I became a second lieutenant in the Connecticut State Guard. Took the boys down to Niantic to the camp down there and had a great time. They thought I was a bastard, but that's all right. We marched from the camp up to another camp there, Woods something or other, and it was hot. Oh, it was hot. I made sure each man had a full canteen of water before we left. And as we're going along, I'd give them a break, keep them at attention, and inform them that they could take out their canteen, they could put some water in their mouth, they could rinse out their mouth, and then they could spit it out. Then they could have a swallow, put the canteen back. Other guys would go. All of my men ended up at the end of the march. You know, they had a bus full of guys in back of us who couldn't make it. And they realized what I was teaching them. I was teaching them that that's how a combat soldier has to be in charge of himself. You have to have water discipline and everything else.
And when did you join the VFW in Avon? Because you're a member of that post now, correct?
They tell me 20 years ago. I don't believe it. Time goes by too fast.
Did you join any other veteran organization?
No.
How would you say the military affected your life?
It gave me a lot more discipline. It taught me a lot about what life is all about. That you're here today and gone tomorrow. That you can't have everything that you want right now. And I thank God that I came through it without too many scars. We stopped down to visit Lucy's sister when she was being fitted for her gown. And there was a girl talking, so I went in the other room and they had a nice hook rug on the floor and I just laid down and went to sleep. Only trouble was a thunderstorm came through. When that damn lightning went, I was up. Let me tell you, I was up. I knew what was going on, but my body hadn't gotten under control yet. But that subconscious mind, just, you hear something like that, and you know what it is, but it's still going to wake you up. I've overcome that. That doesn't bother me anymore.
Is there anything else that you'd like to add that we haven't covered so far, Norm?
Militarily? No, other than that we've written books, and I have asked the VFW to encourage others there to write. Some have, and some haven't. And now we have to understand that a lot of those guys had a 9-to-5, non-excitable occupation. They may have been a driver of a fuel truck at the airport, and they worked from 9 to 5 or 8 to 6 or whatever a shift, you know, and then they went on their own. So the Marines basically have a story because they have to go through boot camp, and every Marine is a rifleman, no matter what his MOS. He's a rifleman, and he can be called any time to be one. So you can't get all the guys to talk. I tried to get Charlie Kilgore to tell his story. He was in the quartermaster, and he was down in Italy, and he had some Italians working with him and so forth. And he tells about getting a rifle and having the Italians build a stock for it and make it pretty and design it. But it's still, it's something you could have done here, and you know, it's nothing he's going to make a big noise about. Now, trying to think of a name now. The ex-lawyer from Avon.
Bob Hunt?
Bob Hunt. He was an amphibious engineer. Second wave D-Day. He's got stories. I hope he writes them down. I've been after him.
Well, I think that we are going to, I actually already interviewed Charlie Kilgore.
Okay.
And Bob Hunt has agreed. So I think Vince Roach is going to interview Bob. So we're, actually your post, I think we've interviewed 9 guys already. And I know a few more want to be interviewed, but you're right about the importance of getting them to write that down.
Mm-hmm. And then we compare notes because we're both combat engineers. It's just that he was an amphibian combat engineer, and he went into, well, actually his unit didn't go in as fast as, some of the amphibians went in before the D-Day, to cut those steel boat traps and tank traps. And the Air Force didn't do its job properly. They were supposed to drop bombs in the water before the beach to make shell craters. A place for the guy to dive in and get out of fire. They went and blasted out the stuff on top, and the guys, they were all huddled down inside where they couldn't get hurt. But our guys, I think it was Art Nariani, said he came off an LST rather, and everything's on his back, of course. Stepped off the ramp into about 6 feet of water. He's only 5 feet tall. He said, I just kept marching and finally got my head above water.
Wow.
But a lot of the guys just drowned because they did that. They panicked and drowned. And Ray Zachara, 82nd Division in South Pacific. I don't know if you talked to him or not yet.
Not yet.
He was in the same squad or platoon with the guy our VFW post is named after. Good friends. And he got wounded, and he was sent back. And at that time, Avon Old Farm School was a military base for blind, handicapped people. And he was helping them get around from place to place while they were being taught how to live in a blind world. So you get him to talk. He'll go quick, because he's not that. He's in a wheelchair now. I mean,
Ray is?
mechanized wheelchair. Yeah, has been for a long time.
Well, I'm going to try to get to the rest of the guys in your post, but I'd like to thank you, Norm, for giving me the interview, and I'd like to thank you for your service to our country.
You want to peruse this stuff?
These are all of Norm's medals. And his dog tags. And his 2 medals from France. And his souvenirs. This is Norm's famous Ike jacket.